How have you found that as a gay man who has conservative values, when perhaps a box they would put you in would be as one of them or part of, I think a phrase one of my previous guests used off mic was, "Oh, you're meant to be part of the community," and he said, "What community is that? Do we have meetups? Do we have gatherings? Do we have a chair that sends out meeting minutes? Because I don't feel a part of any quote unquote community." And they said, "Well, it's the LGBTQTI, I think, because we've got an I in there now as well, community." And he said, "Well, just because of my sexuality doesn't mean I'm part of any group or community." And I'm sure you've had a similar experience.
Oh, very much so, yeah. I in that regard, have been on quite the journey as well. I should preface what I respond to that by saying I am somebody who has known the kind of abuse regarding sexuality that perhaps you would hold in your mind's eye as being rendered to an era of a different age, shall we say, right? My stepfather was deeply homophobic. The kids at school used to call me a puff and a faggot from the age of, well, primary school, basically. And before I even knew what the hell it meant, right? So I've always been aware of the need for people to be accepted for being boring, right? I want to be as boring as every heterosexual couple out there. But perhaps being on that journey is exactly what has filled in me a desire to resist being pigeonholed within, again, we mentioned earlier about the homogenous mass that Scotland is seen as. Well, the LGBTI alphabet soup is also viewed as this homogenous mass. I do not have anything in common with Owen Jones, right? A privileged prat who actually doesn't view what's happened in Israel as a civilizational fight of the kind that we are fighting here in this country. I do view it that way. I was in Israel, I've been 3 times. I would happily go back for a 4th. The way in which actually they try and say, the new thing they say at the minute is queer. If you called me queer right now, I'll be perfectly blunt with you. I would tell you to fuck off and walk out of the room.
Well, I always thought queer is a slur.
It is a slur. Of course it's a slur. You're queer, but they say, oh, well, it's actually co-opting the language that was used against you as a tool of oppression and claiming it for your own. And I don't see it that way at all. I see it as othering, because you can apparently identify as queer if you decide you're something like pansexual. What's that when it's at home? Don't worry, it's not a penchant for pans. But it is indeed apparently, you say that you fall in love not based on what someone's got underneath their legs, in between the legs, I should say, but actually a desire to fall for someone because of who they are as a person intrinsically. Well, that's not the way things work, and I think we all ultimately know that. The movement has gone, and Douglas Murray puts this really well in calling it's a bit like St. George in retirement, where St. George has slain the dragon, and now all he has, meandering through the Swiss rolling vistas of England, all he can find now are sheep. And, the beautiful St. George, all he can do now is go around killing sheep that he finds on his way. And that's a bit like what the equality movement has morphed into. You got same-sex marriage. You achieved everything that you wanted to achieve. I can be equally as boring as my straight heterosexual counterparts. Brilliant. And I was on the fence actually about that being termed marriage, by the way. I don't care what you call it, as long as I have the same rights as somebody else. That's what I wanted, that equality in law. We got that, but they're still not happy. And that's why the trans movement morphed, so they could make even more money out of the charitable sector in pursuit of that. And that has profound repercussions for gay men and women, because I think a lot of the people who are being swept up by the gender craze are just struggling young gay people who are not comfortable with their bodies during the period of puberty and who are experiencing a really quite typical period of adolescence. But they are told that they ought to be automatically affirmed in what I deem to be one of the most homophobic challenges to the system that we've seen since the days when, the likes of Oscar Wilde and Alan Turing would be effectively killed for who it is that they actually are attracted to. So yeah, I've been on one hell of a journey in that movement, but my views haven't changed. I still believe in gay people being able to be as boring as everybody else. I do not believe in gay people or trans people or whatever it might be being able to be exclusionary of everybody else. Exclusionary in the sense of your rights trump everybody else's. I don't believe that. I've never believed that, and I never will. And for saying that, I took down, the first thing I did when I came in...
I've seen that. You withdrew funding from the Durham Pride.
Durham Pride, yeah, I did do that, but I took, for the first act I did, it was Pride Month. Anyway, I took down the flags from outside of this building. There were Pride flags flying. And a member of the Liberal Democrat opposition said, and I shit you not, this is true, Darren Grimes is homophobic. And I thought, well, that's it. There we have it, right? There we have it. I'm not even gay anymore, you know? I took down a flag. I've never spoken about flags so much as I have over the past year. You know, I'm absolutely ran ragged with flags. I've got flags coming out of my ears. But I found it absurd. And I just thought, I think actually most open-minded people listening to this debate would hear a Liberal Democrat say that and think you are neither Liberal or Democratic, and your head is so far up your behind that I hope it smells nice up there. I really do.
To dig into the analogy from Douglas, which I had written down because I know you really like that analogy about St George and retirement, you feel like the quote-unquote battle with the dragon was won for equality through same-sex marriage, to be viewed as equal and as equally boring as anyone else regardless of their sexual proclivity. But now they're going on and on these little crusades in areas that don't warrant the effort or the focus on them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, absolutely right. I mean, perhaps the sheep has morphed into something quite horrendous, because I would argue that the trans movement sort of is a vector for implications on absolutely every walk of life, really, not just gay men and women, but women in general, children's education. It's all a form of that, what's been able to permeate throughout society, which is the Marxist, I would argue, indoctrination of the education system and the takeover of the education system.
Famous socialist Gramsci had the long march through the institutions.
Mm-hmm.
I think that march is completed.
If you look at the judiciary,
if you look at the blob, which is the civil service, big reason we didn't get Brexit was because of who's in the civil service. If we hark back to your time at school, I've heard you say before that when you were being bullied for being gay, if somebody had given you perhaps an opt-out to say, oh, perhaps you're a girl in a boy's body, that would have been something you would have had to consider seriously because of the nature of your environment and the pressure on you from those different forces.
Because in that moment, the only thing you want is to not be the way you are, right? The only thing you want is to be able to say, well, I'm not that. So everything just stops.
That makes me so uncomfortable, because that is basically the Iranian approach where the family can't accept their child as homosexual. So their child must be born in the wrong body. So we'll use this gender affirming care to make a change to this person's life forever in a way that they can never change back from, because you were uncomfortable with the fact that somebody was homosexual. It's so unacceptable. And for the UK to adopt an approach in line with the Islamic Republic of Iran, which is one of the most extremist sects of Islam in the world, how can we be in this position and think it's virtuous or just or the right side of history?
It's sick. It is sick, because the word care, you know, you think of Mother Teresa looking after some sick and poorly orphans. You don't think of chopping someone's breasts off and telling them that they'll be happy as Arthur, not Martha. Well, they won't be happy. Actually, in years to come, they'll look back at their lives, they'll look back at their breastless body and feel a deep sense of regret for what they've been allowed to happen to them. I was going to say what they've allowed to happen. It's not that, actually.
They're children. They're children, and they're not in a position to make that decision. They can't legally, consensually have sex until they're 16, but they can have these surgeries, there's hormone blockers, and these massive changes to them when their brain's not fully developed either. And as the Cash report showed, a huge number of kids with neurodivergence, autism, somewhere on the spectrum, being railroaded by these ideologues in the likes of the Tavistock Clinic. which was thankfully found to be operating way outside of its scope and way over its skis. It's so troubling, and I think, speaking to people now in politics like yourself, previously obviously a social commentator, it's reassuring to have somebody that is speaking the language of the general population, in stark contrast to what we're talking before, where the elites aren't representing the views of the average man on the street. I feel like you are joining that disconnect.
It doesn't make you very popular on the dating apps, I'll tell you that.
I hope you enjoyed that clip. For more on my channel, hit the link just here, subscribe, and you can enjoy the full episode.